That night, the temperature had fallen to 18 degrees below zero. A blackout swallowed all of Chicago, and somewhere in the narrow alley behind the city's most expensive high-rise, a janitor was pressed against the frozen wall with a 4-year-old girl locked in her arms. She didn't know whose child she was holding. She didn't know that dangerous men were already closing in. She knew only what she could feel, that the little one's lips had gone blue, and she was not going to put her down. 20 minutes later, 6 black SUVs would surround that alley from both ends, and Clara Briggs' life would be split in two, everything before that night, and everything after. But to understand how one woman no one had ever noticed could become the hinge on which a powerful man's entire world turned, we have to go back. Back to 40 minutes before those headlights flooded the alley and changed everything forever. 40 minutes before that moment, Clara Briggs was exactly what the world had decided she was, nobody in particular. She was 26 years old, employed by a cleaning company that serviced half the downtown office buildings in Chicago, and invisible in the way that only people who serve the comfortable ever truly are. No one remembered her face when they passed her in the corridor. No one read her name from the badge clipped to her chest. She moved through the gleaming towers of the city like a rumor, pushing her cart, ringing her mop, gathering up the coffee cups and takeout containers that important people left behind without a second thought. She was the woman who made things clean and disappeared before anyone noticed she had been there at all. That particular night, Clara was finishing her shift on the 41st floor of the Hargrove Capitol building, one of the tallest structures on Michigan Avenue. The whole floor was empty by the time she got there. Every monitor had been switched off. Every desk had been cleared. The blizzard had sent the bankers and brokers home hours before their usual time, and they had left their polished world to Clara and the sound of the wind pressing hard against the glass. She stopped at the wide window at the end of the hall and looked out at the city. Snow was coming down so thick it looked solid, a white wall grinding against everything, blurring the skylines of the buildings across the street until they were only suggestions in the dark. The phone in her uniform pocket buzzed once. She pulled it out. The battery icon was blinking at 4%, and the message on the screen was from her brother Danny. Already took my inhaler. Soup's on the stove. Don't rush and be careful out there, sis. Clara stared at the message for a long moment. She pressed her thumb against the words as though the pressure alone could carry something back to him. Danny, 11 years old, asthmatic, alone in their apartment across the river. A child who set his own alarms, managed his own medications, and had learned not to expect his sister home before midnight, because he understood, even at his age, that she had no choice. Clara put the phone back in her pocket. She had to move. She cleared out her supplies, locked up the storage closet, and rode the elevator down to the lobby. In the mirror panel on the elevator wall she caught her reflection without meaning to. Dark circles carved under her eyes. A small healing cut on her chin from where she'd knocked into a cabinet door 2 nights before. Her cleaning uniform, washed so many times the fabric had started to thin at the elbows. She was 26 years old. She looked 33. The lobby was abandoned. The night guard station was empty, and a handwritten note had been left propped against the sign-in book. Roads are dangerous. Lock the side door on your way out. Stay safe. Clara buttoned her coat to the throat, the old olive green coat she'd had for 5 winters now, its lining gone thin and unreliable against serious cold. She stepped through the door into the storm and the wind hit her like a punishment. 18 degrees below zero and still dropping. The snow was already past her ankles. Every normal route home was going to take close to 30 minutes in this, and she'd have to fight the wind the entire way. But she knew a shorter path, the service alley that ran along the back of the Callaway Group Tower 2 blocks over. If she cut through there, she could shave nearly 15 minutes off the walk. 15 minutes was the difference between Danny lying awake worrying and Danny already asleep. She turned toward the alley without hesitating. The alley was narrower than she remembered, and the snow inside it was untouched, deep and unmarked, no one having passed through tonight. Every step required effort. The cold crept through the cracked soles of her boots and settled into her feet like something alive. The walls on either side funneled the wind into a sharp, punishing stream that sliced across her face no matter how low she bowed her head. She counted steps to keep herself moving. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the lights died. Not just one or two. Every single light in every direction. The street lamps. The building windows. The emergency exit signs glowing above service doors. Gone, all of them, simultaneously, as though the storm had finally lost patience and reached down and switched the whole city off. Clara stopped walking. The darkness was total except for the pale gray glow the snow itself gave off, reflecting what little light the sky held. She was completely alone in the alley. She breathed in, breathed out, and prepared to keep going. That was when she heard it. Small and frail and nearly crushed under the sound of the wind. A child crying. If this story is reaching you, please take a moment to press the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you want to stay with Clara through everything that comes next, subscribe to the channel so you never miss what happens. Clara went still. She stood in the dark alley with the snow swirling around her ankles and she listened with everything she had. The sound was still there, thin, wavering, rising and falling with the gusts of wind. It was the kind of crying that had already gone on for a while, the worn-down crying of a child who had been frightened for so long they were running out of energy for it. Clara reached into her coat pocket. Her phone showed 2% battery. She switched on the flashlight and started moving toward the sound. The beam was weak, barely reaching 6 feet ahead, but it was enough. She swept it across overturned milk crates, across the snow-covered lids of trash cans, across the dark gap between two enormous metal dumpsters pressed against the far wall. The crying stopped. Clara stopped with it. She kept her voice as low and as gentle as she could make it, the same voice she used when Danny woke up in the night unable to breathe and needed someone to talk him calm. She said, "I'm not going to hurt you. There's nothing to be afraid of. I only want to help. Nothing. Only the wind and the snow and the silence of a frightened child holding itself completely still." Then the flashlight found a small shape between the two dumpsters. Two tiny bare feet sticking out of a gap in the cardboard that had been stacked there, paper pale and motionless, the toes curled inward from the cold. Clara moved slowly, the way you move towards something you don't want to startle. She crouched down. She pointed the light gently upward so it wouldn't blind, and looked into the gap. There was a little girl inside. She was maybe 3 or 4 years old, wearing pajamas, soft pink ones printed with little stars, and nothing else. No socks. No shoes. No coat. She was pressed into the corner of the space between the dumpsters with a small stuffed elephant clutched so tightly against her chest that its button eye had pressed a red mark into her cheek. She was looking at Clara with enormous dark eyes, and she was shaking badly. Clara didn't stop to think. She unzipped her coat, peeled it off her own shoulders, and wrapped it around the little girl in one movement. The cold air hit Clara's body like a wall, but she didn't flinch. She reached into the space between the dumpsters and lifted the child out gently, bringing her against her chest, folding both arms around her. The little girl went rigid for just a second, the panic of being touched by a stranger. Then the warmth reached her, and she exhaled the longest, most exhausted breath, and buried her face against Clara's neck and began to cry again, but differently now. This was the crying of relief. Two small hands gripped the back of Clara's sweater, and the stuffed elephant was pressed between their chests, squashed between two heartbeats. Clara held her and kept talking, softly, steadily, the way she would have talked Danny down from an anxiety attack at 2 in the morning. "You're safe now. I've got you. You're all right." After a little while the shaking eased. The crying became quieter. Clara looked down at the girl's face. She asked her name as softly as she could, and the child blinked up at her and said, in the smallest voice imaginable, "Nora." And then she held up the stuffed elephant and added, "And Benny." Clara looked at the elephant. One ear was coming unstitched and his trunk was bent sideways from being held so tightly for so long. She straightened the ear as carefully as she could. She told Nora that Benny was very brave for staying with her, and Nora nodded in complete seriousness and tucked the elephant back against her chest. Clara stood up, the child in her arms, and turned back toward the mouth of the alley. She had to find a police officer. She had to find a warm building, a phone with battery left, anything. She took 3 steps toward the street. Headlights smashed into her face. Not one set. 2. Both ends of the alley lit up at the same time, high-beam headlights flooding the narrow space with blinding white light that turned the snow into a solid curtain of brightness. Clara threw one arm across her eyes and stepped back, pressing Nora closer. She could hear the engines idling, low and heavy. The sound of a car door opening. Footsteps crunching through snow. A man stepped into the edge of the light. He was large, broad through the shoulders, wearing the kind of close-fitting dark jacket that cost more than Clara made in a month. His face was smooth and controlled, and he was smiling. The smile was the first thing that told Clara something was deeply wrong. It was the smile of a man performing an emotion, not feeling one. He spread his hands at his sides in a gesture meant to look reassuring. "There she is," he said, his voice warm and perfectly calibrated. "Thank goodness. I'm head of security for the Calloway Group. This little girl belongs to one of our executive families. She slipped away from the private residence on the upper floors. Her parents are out of their minds with worry." He paused, tilting his head. "I'll take her from here." Clara looked at him. She didn't move. Her arm around Nora tightened by the smallest amount, enough to feel but not enough to show. Everything she could read in this man was wrong. His voice was too smooth. His composure was too complete. A man who had been searching for a missing 4-year-old in an 18-degree blizzard for any amount of time would have sweat on his collar, wind redness in his cheeks, some physical sign of urgency. This man looked like he had just stepped out of a temperature-controlled car 30 seconds ago. And Nora, who had said nothing since the man appeared, had gone completely rigid in Clara's arms. Not the rigidness of cold. The rigidness of a child who has recognized something and is trying to become invisible. "What floor is the family on?" Clara asked. Her voice came out steady. She was glad for that. "I work this building. I can call up to the residents directly and confirm." The man's eyes changed. Only slightly, and only for a second, but Clara caught it. An irritation moving behind the politeness like something sliding under ice. "There isn't time for that," he said. "The child is in danger in this cold. I need to take her now." "Then the family can come down themselves," Clara said. "I'm happy to wait here with her until they do." The man stopped smiling. He took a step forward. In Clara's arms, Nora made a single tiny sound, not a word, just a sound, and turned her face completely away from him, pressing it into Clara's shoulder. "You're making a mistake," the man said. His voice had changed now. The warmth was entirely gone. "Give her to me." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps and grabbed Clara's wrist with a grip that felt like a clamp screwing shut. Clara didn't let go of the child. She turned her shoulder to shield Nora and planted her feet in the snow and didn't move. "No," she said. The man yanked her forward. She stumbled but caught herself against the dumpster and still didn't release the little girl. Pain shot up from her wrist through her whole arm. She could feel the bruise already forming. Nora was crying now, quietly, her face buried, her small hands clutched so tightly in Clara's sweater that Clara could feel the fabric pulling taut across her back. "Let go," the man said through his teeth. "I have no intention of hurting you. But I will do whatever is necessary." Clara looked straight at him. She thought about Danny, alone across the river. She thought about what would happen to this child if she let go. She thought about the way Nora had said in Benny when she told Clara her name, as though the elephant needed to be introduced and accounted for, as though even in her terror she was looking out for something smaller than herself. Clara set her jaw. She said, "Then you'll have to take her from me, because I'm not putting her down." He raised his fist. Before he could bring it down, the alley filled with light and sound at once. Engines. Multiple engines, roaring from both ends of the narrow space. The headlights multiplied and the walls of the alley lit up solid white. 6 black SUVs rolled in from both directions and stopped in perfect formation, sealing the alley completely with no gap left at either end. Every door opened at the same moment. Men stepped out, 8, 10, 12 of them, moving with the kind of coordinated stillness that comes from a great deal of practice. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The man holding Clara's wrist released it and stepped back, and for the first time since he had appeared in the alley, the performance on his face dropped completely. What was underneath it was pure, cold fear. From the center vehicle, the tallest of all 6, a door opened and a man stepped out alone. He was not the largest person in the alley, but every other person in it went quiet the moment he appeared. He was perhaps 38 or 39, dark-coated against the snow, with black hair and a face that was hard in the way that very controlled things are hard, not cruel exactly, but absolute, the face of a person who had not been argued with successfully in a very long time. He walked forward through the snow at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, and the men who had arrived with him simply made way. He stopped 10 feet from Clara. His eyes went to the child first. They stayed there. Something moved across that controlled face, fast, difficult to name, but unmistakable. The face of a man who had been genuinely terrified and is only now, this second, letting himself believe it might be over. "Nora," he said. His voice, for just those 4 letters, was different from everything else about him. Nora turned at the sound of it. She looked up from Clara's shoulder. She said, "Daddy," in a voice that was so small and so entirely certain, the voice of a child who has found the one person who makes the world make sense again, and reached both arms toward him. The man closed the remaining distance in 3 steps and took his daughter from Clara's arms carefully, pressing her against his chest with both hands and closing his eyes for one moment that he clearly had not intended anyone to witness. Nora wrapped her arms around his neck and Benny was squashed between them, bent trunk and unstitched ear and all. Clara stepped back. She suddenly had nothing to hold and didn't quite know where to put her hands. The man who had grabbed her wrist was already being handled by 2 of the others, walked backward toward one of the vehicles, no resistance in him at all. Clara didn't watch. She was looking at the ground, at her own feet in the snow, thinking about Danny and the time and the fact that her coat was now somewhere else entirely and the cold was starting to bite seriously at her arms through her sweater. She felt a weight settle around her shoulders. She looked up. One of the men who had arrived with the vehicles was draping a coat around her, a long black wool coat, clearly belonging to someone important, warm the way only expensive things are warm. She didn't know where it had come from. She started to say something and stopped. The man with dark hair, Nora's father, was looking directly at her now. He had shifted his daughter to one arm, and Nora's head was resting against his shoulder in the way that children rest against the thing they are most sure of in the world. He studied Clara's face for a long moment. She had the sensation of being read, page by page, by someone who read very quickly. "Your name," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Clara," she said. "Clara Briggs." He nodded. "I'm Dominic Calloway," he said. "That building," he tilted his head toward the tower at the alley's edge, "is mine." Clara looked at the building and then back at him. She said she had just finished her shift in it. He said he knew. One of the men behind him stepped forward and offered her a card. On it was a number and nothing else. "Go home tonight," Dominic Calloway said. "Rest." Come to the top floor at 9 tomorrow morning. Ask for Bennett. He'll bring you to me. Clara looked at the card. Why? She said. He looked at Nora, who had fallen almost entirely asleep against his shoulder in the last 2 minutes. He looked back at Clara. Because you took your coat off in an 18 degrees blizzard and gave it to someone else's child, he said. And because I want to know what you need, and whether I can provide it. Clara had nothing to say to that. She closed her hand around the card. One of the vehicles took her home. She tried to say it wasn't necessary and was quietly informed that it was not really a negotiation. She sat in the back seat with the black coat still around her shoulders and the heat blasting and the windows showing Chicago as a blurred white world outside, and she thought about Danny, who had stayed up after all, and who was sitting at the kitchen table with his inhaler beside him and a bowl of cold soup he'd made for her still waiting. When she came through the door he looked at the coat and then at her face and said, very carefully, "What happened to you?" She sat down across from him and said, "It's a long story." He said he had nothing but time. She looked at her little brother under the bright kitchen light and she told him everything. At 9 the next morning Clara took the elevator to the top floor of the Callaway Group building, which was nothing like the floor she mopped every second Tuesday. The space was vast and quiet, all pale marble and floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over Lake Michigan. A man named Bennett met her, nodded without smiling, and led her to a corner office where Dominic Callaway was already seated behind a desk that was wider than most people's dining room tables. The view behind him showed the lake frozen to the horizon, steel gray and motionless under a white sky. He was on a call when she came in. He ended it without finishing the sentence and gestured to the chair across from him. Nora came running from the far side of the room before Clara had even sat down, Benny swinging from one hand, and threw both arms around Clara's knees with enough force to nearly knock her sideways. She said Clara's name the way she had said Benny's name the night before, with complete and automatic ownership. Clara knelt down and hugged her back. Over the top of Nora's head she saw Dominic Callaway watching them. Something in his expression shifted, briefly, before he put it back where it had been. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. He asked her questions, direct, specific, and sequenced in a way that told Clara he already knew some of the answers and was only verifying. Her employment history. Her family situation. What she needed that she didn't currently have. She answered with the same directness. She had been cleaning offices for 4 years. She lived with her younger brother. He had a chronic respiratory condition that had needed a procedure for the past 2 years, a procedure that their combined insurance didn't cover. She was approximately $11,000 short of what it would cost. She said all of this without asking for anything, because he had asked and it seemed dishonest to leave parts out. He listened without interrupting. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. Then he offered her a position. Executive coordinator. She would manage his daily schedule, prepare briefing documents, accompany him to certain meetings, and serve as the primary point of contact for his daughter's care arrangements during working hours. The hours were demanding and the nature of his business required complete discretion. Clara said she understood. He told her the salary. She kept her face still through an act of pure willpower, because the number was more than 3 times what she made from cleaning and her second weekend job combined. And then he mentioned the benefits package, which included full family medical coverage, and Clara stopped keeping her face still. Something must have moved in it that she couldn't control, because he paused again, watching her. "I protect my people," he said. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, or maybe had heard briefly in the alley when he said Nora's name. Certainty. Not the performed certainty of someone trying to sound impressive. The plain certainty of someone stating a fact about their own nature. Anyone in my circle, their family included, they're mine to protect. I want you to understand that before you answer. Clara looked at him across the wide desk. Behind her Nora was sitting on the carpet rearranging Benny's ears with great concentration and narrating quietly to herself. Clara thought about Danny at the kitchen table last night, with his inhaler and his cold soup and his two old eyes. She thought about what it would mean to be protected by someone who meant the word the way this man clearly meant it. She said, "I don't need to think it over." "Yes." He nodded. If he was surprised he didn't show it, though she had the feeling he was not. He told her Bennett would bring the paperwork by her apartment that afternoon. She could start at the beginning of the following week. Nora looked up when Clara stood to leave and asked, very seriously, if Clara was coming back. Clara crouched down to her level and told her she was coming back every single day from now on. Nora considered this, then held Benny out toward Clara. Clara gently pressed the elephant's bent ear flat and handed him back. Nora seemed satisfied. She went back to her narrating. At the door Clara paused. She looked back. Dominic Calloway had come around the desk and was crouching on the floor next to his daughter, and Nora was showing him something she had done with Benny that was apparently of great importance, and the most powerful man in Chicago, the man all of this city's certain kind of people regarded with a very particular kind of careful respect, was paying close attention with both of his hands folded on his knees and his entire focus given over to a stuffed elephant with a bent trunk and a loose ear. Clara turned back toward the door before he could see her face. She went home and she told Danny. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table as the night before, and she told him about the job and the salary and the insurance coverage, all of it. Danny was quiet for a long time after she finished. He had his inhaler in both hands, turning it slowly like he did when he was processing something. Then he looked up at her, and his eyes were bright, and he said, "Clara. You're going to be okay." She said, "We're going to be okay." He corrected himself. He said, "We." They sat there for a while in the quiet kitchen while the snow kept falling outside and the heat from the old radiator ticked and knocked in the corner like it always did, and for the first time in 4 years Clara did not do a single calculation in her head. There was nothing left to calculate. Everything she had been carrying, all of the weight of it, all of the barely enoughs and the middle-of-the-night math and the pretending for Danny's sake that everything was fine, began to slowly release from her shoulders like something that had been fastened there for a very long time finally coming undone. She had walked into a frozen alley on the worst night of the year with 2% battery on her phone and a coat whose lining had given up 3 winters ago. She had heard a sound that she could have decided wasn't her problem. She could have walked toward home and toward Danny and toward warmth, and the world would have let her do it, and no one would have blamed her, and she would never have known what she had passed by. But she turned around. She always turned around. That was the thing about Clara Briggs that no directory listed and no badge described. She was the kind of person who turned around. And because she did, everything changed. Sometimes a single night holds the rest of your life inside it, and you only find out afterward. Sometimes the choice that asks the most of you is the one that gives back more than you ever thought to ask for. And sometimes the world, cold and enormous and indifferent as it mostly is, reaches through the dark and the snow and the wind to find exactly one person who will not walk away. And when it does, that person's life begins. If this story has stayed with you, if something in it moved you or reminded you of someone you love, please take a moment to hit the like button and share this video with the people who matter to you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the stories we bring you, and drop a comment below. We would genuinely love to hear what you think. Have you ever made a choice that seemed small in the moment and turned out to change everything? Tell us about it. Every comment you leave lets us know these stories are reaching you, and that's what keeps us going. Thank you for spending this time with us tonight. Take care of yourselves, take care of the people around you, and we'll see you in the next one.